Hello again, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about reviews. Now we're going to discuss what even is a review, as well as how to structure it and how to decide what content should go in it. So first, let's see what a review is and what we are doing when we write a review. A review is simply a critical evaluation of a text, object, event, place, service, or phenomenon. And the times that you will have to write reviews can be incredibly varied. It could be an assignment in school or university. It could be work for an online publication or for a written publication like a newspaper, for news organizations, for blogs, for your Tumblr page. It could be almost anything. And their style depends much on how serious the publication is and how formal the publication is, as well as what format it is being published in. Is it a blog or is it a newspaper? However, we will almost never use informal style for any serious publication or university assignment. Now, when we're writing reviews, it should be noted that we give preference to the present tense in the main body of the review when we are discussing what we are reviewing. For example, if you want to discuss what happens at the beginning of a movie, you should say something like, "The action takes place in the Middle Ages," instead of "the action took place in the Middle Ages." We call these kind of colloquially, we call these action words because you are talking about the action that is happening in the film. So we use the present tense to do this. However, if you are writing about your visit to a museum or a performance or a play, or if you are talking about the creation of the object that you are reviewing, for example, how the film was made, how the book was written, here, you may use past tense structures. For example, if I say, "When I came into the first room, I was amazed by the interior." Or if I'm talking about a CD that I'm reviewing, "The band spent almost 1 year in the studio before releasing their new album." Here, because I'm talking about my own experience, or because I'm talking about the creation, I may use the past tense. But again, if I'm talking about the content itself, I must use the present tense, and normally the present simple tense. Now, while we're writing a review, we may have to do different things inside of the same review. For example, we may describe something. For example, a character in a play, or a song on a CD. Or we may also give a summary, for example, the general plot of a book, but remember, no spoilers. Or we might also explain and argue, for example, why we think a film is not successful, or why we think that something is quite good. And we also might compare, for example, two dishes in a restaurant and contrast them. And good reviews will often have elements of all four of these aspects. A very good review will do all four of these things in the same document. However, now that you know some of the material that goes into a review, you should know some of the main rules about writing a review. So let's try and structure a review together. And for us, we will be writing the review of an album or of a CD. And before you should not forget about 3 important steps. Firstly, you cannot cover all of the information about a CD or a movie or a book in one review. So you need to choose what particular aspect you are going to write about. Even if it's a longer review, you still can't talk about everything. So you need to choose which parts you want to write about. For example, a particular song or vocals on a CD, or the acting or special effects in a movie, the plot or characters of a book, or the food and service in a restaurant. So talking about a CD, there can be several tracks that particularly stand out, or we could talk about the overall tone of the album, or the singer or the band's performance. Here, in our review, let's say that we want to talk about particular album tracks. So now we have decided what we are writing about. Next, we need to decide on our perspective. Do we like it or do we hate it? You must be in a review either happy or dissatisfied. It's very important to understand that your perspective cannot be neutral. And even if you try to write a neutral review, it will most likely be understood as negative. So, neutral reviews are not helpful, and they cannot help someone make a decision. And that is why most people, when faced with a neutral review, will understand it as negative. In our case, we're going to pretend that we bought a good CD. So we're going to write a positive review. And finally, you should understand who your audience is and who you're writing for. That will help you choose the appropriate style to write in. Should you use formal language and a formal format, or should you use semi-formal and a slightly more relaxed, personal format? Remember that if you're writing for a general audience, you should give a little bit more details about the thing that you are writing about as well. Assume that if you are writing for a general audience, that the reader does not know anything about the topic you are writing about. Now, if it's a very specific audience that you know very well, you can forget that rule. You know what they know and what they don't. But if you don't know anything, assume that they don't know anything. Now, structurally, a review, just like any other form of writing, has three main parts: the introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. So let's look at how we form each of these in a review. In a review, the introduction is going to contain all of the background information about the work. It's going to contain any information that I need to understand the rest of the work. So in this case, a brief description of the product that I'm reviewing, including main details like names, authors, actors. Now, a truly successful introduction, though, needs to grab the attention of your audience. It needs to be intriguing and interesting. And it needs what we call, in the business, an attention grabber, or more formally, something like a recollection of a past event, or an anecdote, or a quote, usually a famous quote, or something like an intriguing statement, or a rhetorical question. All of these are meant to attract the attention of your audience, to make them want to read more. So let's try and write our introduction using what we just discussed. I could say something like, "Last year in Paris, when wandering around a local flea market, I came across a true treasure, hidden in piles of old clothes." Here, I'm starting my introduction with a personal story. This hopefully will make my reader interested and will make them want to know more. So now, let's continue writing. The box was so dirty that you could hardly read the name. However, because of the sketch drawing of the Eiffel Tower, I understood it was the CD I had been looking for. Hymn of Love, all her greatest songs in English. A rare album of Edith Piaf, one of France's international stars of all times. Here, I'm doing two things. One, I'm continuing my story and telling you what I bought, as well as providing you background information on who Edith is. Because unless you're very familiar with France and French music, you may not know who she is. Now, we're finished with the introduction, but we need to say one more thing about it. Most students feel that the introduction is the most difficult part of any review, and a lot of students feel that it's the most difficult part of any essay, period. So, most people choose to write it last, and this is what I would recommend. Because it is so difficult, Most people find it much easier to organize their thoughts if they finish by writing the introduction, finishing with the beginning. However, this is also what I would recommend for your written tasks, and anytime you need to write an essay, write the introduction last. Now, the second part of your review is going to be the main body. And in any essay, the main body is where we provide more information about our arguments or about our topic. So in a review, the main body is going to contain details about particular aspects of a product or service. Those same particular aspects, by the way, that we chose earlier, as well as an evaluation of the products or service. This could be, well, in this section, I'm not just saying, these are the characters, these are the songs. I'm saying, what's good about the songs? What's bad about the songs? What do I like about them? Now, if you're writing about a book or a movie, you may need to provide a short summary of the plot of this movie, but it's very important that you spend no more than 2 to 3 sentences explaining the plot and explaining the background of the movie. Now, these can be 2 or 3 very long, complex sentences with multiple clauses. However, no more than 2 or 3 sentences ending with periods. And as always, no spoilers. Now, generally, 1/2 to 2/3 of the review is going to be taken up by summaries and descriptions. The last 1/3 of the main body, or of each paragraph in the main body, is going to be used for evaluation. So if I'm explaining the particular track, or if I'm explaining a particular track on a CD, I'll spend the first few sentences explaining what it is, and only the last little section explaining what was good and what was bad. So let's proceed and see what this looks like in our own review. As the title suggests, the album contains 16 tracks, including La Vie en Rose and Non, Je ne regrette rien, but in their English versions. Although all the songs are slow and lyrical, the atmosphere of the album is not at all melancholic. Quite the opposite. Edith Piaf's voice and the music itself seems to be full of love for life and people. So, when the last track is over, you are left in slightly higher spirits, wanting for more. Here, my personal opinion and my evaluation is only the last little section. It's not all throughout the paragraph, just those last 2 sentences. Now, here comes the second paragraph. If you wonder why it was so difficult to find Hymn of Love, all her greatest songs in English, the answer is simple. French people, in their scorn for anything English, think that the English lyrics have ruined Piaf's songs. I would not agree that the English lyrics make Piaf's songs sound worse, but they do make them understandable for non-French speakers. Listening closely to the majority of Piaf's songs, some may get disappointed over not finding many profound lyrics. Her poetry is simple and lacking metaphors or symbols, and I believe this is the reason why these songs are still loved by millions of people around the world, as we can understand and relate to them. Now, we've divided our main body into 2 paragraphs, because we're talking about 2 different topics. Again, just like we talked about in our lesson on formal letters, we have to separate each point by paragraphs. Now, finally, we've come to the last part of our review, the conclusion. And like always, the conclusion summarizes your main body in a few sentences and contains recommendations for the readers. As a rule, you will include critical analysis in the main body, and the conclusion will naturally follow what you have written in the main body. So, since we just talked about our main body, let's make a little conclusion for our own review. We could say something like, thus, simplicity in combination with inspiring music and soulful performance is, in fact, what makes Piaf's songs remarkable. I would definitely recommend listening to Hymn of Love, all her greatest songs in English, especially when you are feeling down, as it reminds you that life is not that bad after all. Now, our review is ready, and you can read it one more time in full. Now, when writing reviews, you also need to use a variety of adjectives to describe the product or the service that you are reviewing. In our review, we talked about a rare album and lyrical songs, as well as a melancholic atmosphere and profound lyrics and a soulful performance. But we can add some more adjectives to make our review sound even better. For example, let's take a phrase from the introduction. Hymn of Love, all her greatest songs in English, a rare album of Edith Piaf, one of France's most outstanding international stars of all times. Here, because I'm providing you information about Edith, I've provided you even more information by adding this adjective, and it makes your writing more interesting as well. Let's look at another example. The album contains 16 tracks, including the legendary songs La Vie en Rose and Non Je ne regrette rien. If we leave these sentences unchanged, the readers who are not familiar with Edith's work may not understand why I picked these two songs specifically to mention. However, when I add legendary, it becomes immediately apparent to the reader why these songs were chosen, even if they don't know much about Miss Piaf. Then they can tell you that these two songs are some of her most famous. Now, we could also change the sentence like this, or we could also change another sentence such as, the French, in their scorn for anything English, think the English lyrics have ruined Piaf's greatest songs. Here, again, I'm saying something a little bit different than the original, where I just say ruined Piaf's songs. Because in my changed sentence, ruined her greatest songs, I'm saying that not all of her songs were ruined, just the important ones. And there's one more sentence in this review that can be made more interesting by inserting several adjectives to it. Her poetry is simple and lacking metaphors or symbols. Could turn into, her poetry is simple and lacking elaborate metaphors or poetic symbols. Here, again, I'm giving you more information. What kind of metaphors? What kind of symbols? And the adjectives you choose when you write a review will largely depend on what you are reviewing. There are a great number of different adjectives, and obviously we can't talk about all of them in one lesson. But here are some examples of adjectives that you can use when reviewing plays, books, films. So, if we're talking about books, plays, and films, to talk about the characters, we might use phrases like unconvincing, or likable, or convincible and believable. And if we're talking about the plot, we might say words like complicated, or predictable, or gripping. In this case, gripping is a very high compliment for a plot, meaning exciting. For the special effects, we could call them cheap or bad, stunning or amazing, or outstanding, breathtaking, incredible, impressive, or even unimpressive. For acting or performance, we could talk about people being wooden or stiff, natural, powerful, or even spectacular. And for the writing or the script, we can talk about it being confusing, realistic, or thought-provoking. Now, here are some examples that we use, on the other hand, when we're talking about music. If we're talking about songs and tracks, we usually call them something like outstanding, or impressive, remarkable, or even weak or dull. If we're talking about music, it may be moving or inspiring, both being good traits, or unimaginative, Another word for boring. If we talk about the lyrics, we could call the lyrics thought-provoking, or profound, or meaningful. Or, if we don't like them, the opposites, cliched or awful. Now, to add even more emphasis to our review, we could also add adverbs such as extremely, or absolutely, completely, or incredibly, or exceptionally, or totally, or entirely. But when using adjectives and adverbs, pay attention to very strong adjectives. These are adjectives that are much stronger than our normal words. For example, the word awful. We normally explain awful as being very bad. Or the word gorgeous. It's not just beautiful, it's very beautiful. Or the word hilarious. It's not just funny, it's very, very funny. And remember that these strong adjectives cannot be modified by the adverb very, but we can use the adverbs absolutely or really instead. He was absolutely thrilled, or it's really huge. Now for you, just remember that if an adjective has a very strong meaning, don't use very. Use really or absolutely or one of the other adverbs. Now, finally, let's consider a table with some examples of cliched phrases that you can use in your reviews. Now, again, this section may feel like cheating a little bit, because I'm giving you phrases that you can just copy and paste into your reviews. However, I promise you it's not. These are the phrases that native speakers honestly will insert into their reviews. And it's language that's not only common, it's almost expected. So, let's look at some examples. For positive reviews, you may see phrases like, one of the best things about this movie is, or what is striking about this movie is. Other phrases, I would advise anyone to see, watch, go to, buy tickets for, etc. Or this is a film, book, performance that you should not miss. Other phrases, if you have the chance, make sure you see this play. Or the book is well worth reading. Other phrases, I would thoroughly, or strongly, or definitely, or highly recommend. Or even other phrases making comparisons. For example, if you like movie A, then this is the film for you. Or it is a film that will change the way you think about life, music, or even red chairs. Why not? Now for negative reviews, you may see phrases that look something like this. One of the problems with this play, album, etc., or one of the weak points, i.e. problems, in this is, if we really don't like something, we'll say that film A is not worth seeing. However, this is when we really don't like something. Similarly, we could also say, this is a film, book, or CD to avoid. Now, if something disappoints us, we could say something like, unfortunately, this book fails to live up to expectations. I expected it to be better, but it's not. The next phrase, I am afraid that film A is a complete waste of time and money. If this phrase sounds very serious and very strong, it's because it is. We use this phrase to show that we are so disappointed, so unhappy with something, that we feel like it should not have even been made. They should have thrown it in the garbage halfway through production. And finally, I certainly wouldn't recommend the play, film, or book because. And we may also specify a group of people here. I certainly wouldn't recommend this movie to a group of people because. And we'll use this maybe if there's some content. For example, a lot of blood or other things that some viewers may find inappropriate that to some people may be dislikable. Now, there are also some phrases that are found in both positive and negative reviews alike. For example, most critics agree that, or when reading this book, watching this film, listening to this CD, etc., one of the things that instantly grabs your attention is. Here, I'm explaining the thing that I noticed first. As far as the individual tracks are concerned, here I'm changing topics as far as something is concerned. Another point worth mentioning, adding another point. Reading this book, watching this film, or listening to this CD, you cannot fail to. Here, this is like a more formal version of the phrase, can't help but. Here, reading this book, you cannot fail to appreciate, you cannot fail to think of. Next, if I were to have one criticism of film A, it would be that. This phrase, because it's a conditional, may sound a little bit strange. And in this phrase, I use it when I like something, generally. Generally, I like it. But in order to avoid sounding biased, in order to avoid sounding like I'm just saying, oh, this is so good and everything is good and it's absolutely perfect, I will use this structure. If I were to have one criticism, it would be that. I like it, but if I had to pick something bad, it would be that. Next, the book, film, or play leaves you feeling. Here I'm discussing my emotions after watching or reading. Next, the film, play, or event is set in. Here I'm talking about the background or the setting. And finally, as the plot or story evolves, here I'm explaining about the continuation of the plot or the story. Now, you can read the full review that we wrote together earlier, as well as find all of the useful phrases and vocabulary for this lesson in the attachments and supporting materials to this lesson. I highly recommend that you read the review a few times and become familiar with the format and the language and the pacing, and use this as a template when you are writing your own reviews for the first few tries. Once you become used to writing these, they'll be pretty easy. So, review everything, review the materials, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye!